Over 3 years. That's how long Ukraine has been waiting, planning, watching, choosing the exact moment to take its revenge for a war, crime that shocked the entire world. It was Vladimir Putin who gave the order that day back in 2022, the order that turned a group of Russian soldiers into the infamous butchers of Bucha. Under his command, those soldiers executed civilians, terrorized families, and left behind images so horrific that they remain etched in the global conscience. Now, years later, Ukraine has delivered its justice. The butchers of Bucha have been struck down, eliminated, and not on the battlefield, but in a way that stunned both Moscow and the rest of the world, through a covert operation carried out over 4,000 miles deep into Russian territory. It was a strike so daring, so audacious that it almost reads like fiction. But it wasn't. It was real. The details of the operation are scarce, which is no surprise. The main Directorate of Intelligence of Ukraine, better known as HUR, was behind it. This secretive intelligence service has become one of the sharpest, most dangerous tools in Ukraine's arsenal, and secrecy is its lifeblood. The less Russia knows, the more Ukraine can strike again. Still, fragments of the story have leaked, enough to piece together the outlines of what might be one of the most remarkable clandestine missions of the war so far. According to reports, HUR infiltrated operatives into Russia sometime before September 8th. Their target, a Russian national guard unit stationed near the city of Khabarovsk, in Russia's far east. That's almost 6,500 kilometers, about 4,030 miles, from the Ukrainian border, a distance so vast that if these operatives had been discovered, escape would have been virtually impossible. They would have been hunted down, cornered, and almost certainly killed. But discovery never came. Instead, the operatives pulled off a precision strike that wiped out members of the very unit Ukraine had been hunting for years, because this wasn't just any National Guard detachment. This was Russia's military unit 6912, part of the 748th Separate Operational Battalion. And it was this very battalion, open source evidence shows, that took part in the horrors unleashed in Bucha back in 2022. The operatives managed to plant 2 explosive devices in a parking lot right outside the base. Then they waited. On the morning of September 8th, just as Russian soldiers were reporting for duty, the bombs went off. It was the perfect moment. Soldiers moving between their vehicles and the building were caught in the blasts, ensuring maximum damage. HUR's source refused to reveal exactly how many Russians were killed or wounded. All that was said is that several personnel were hit, all of them, members of the Russian military. That was enough. The strike wasn't about numbers. It was about who those soldiers were, the butchers of Bucha. But how do we know this strike truly happened? After all, no official images or videos emerged. Unlike the many long-range drone strikes Ukraine conducts against oil depots or air bases, this wasn't the kind of operation that leaves plumes of smoke rising above cities for the world to film. Yet Russia's own behavior all but confirmed it. Almost immediately after the explosions, Russia's security services moved in to shut down mobile internet access in the Khabarovsk region. This isn't unusual. In fact, Russia has adopted the tactic of cutting communications whenever Ukraine lands a particularly heavy blow. Officially, Moscow claims these shutdowns are meant to interfere with drones, but journalists and analysts have pointed out that drones don't rely solely on mobile internet for navigation. The shutdowns don't stop drones. So what's the real purpose? The truth is simple: control. No internet means no videos, no eyewitness reports, no social media chatter. It means Russians living near the base couldn't spread what they saw. It means the Kremlin gets to decide what the truth is. And this wasn't the only sign. Public transportation routes in and around Khabarovsk were suddenly altered. Another classic Russian move. By rerouting buses and trains, they kept ordinary citizens away from the area, limiting the chances of anyone witnessing the aftermath. Put these details together, and a clear picture emerges. Something major happened there. Something Russia does not want its people or the wider world to know about. And yet the truth slipped through. Because Ukraine's target wasn't just random Russian soldiers. It was the men tied to one of the darkest chapters of the war, the massacre at Bucha. To understand why this strike matters, we have to revisit what happened in 2022. On April 1st of that year, Ukrinform reported that Russian troops, forced to retreat from the city of Bucha after weeks of resistance, did not leave quietly. As they withdrew, they seeded mines inside homes, schools, and infrastructure that had no military purpose whatsoever. These booby traps were designed to kill civilians returning to their neighborhoods, but the mines were only part of the story. When Ukrainian forces re-entered Bucha, what they found was a nightmare. Satellite images later confirmed what residents already knew. The streets were lined with bodies. Civilians gunned down, left to rot in the open. Families executed. Mass graves dug into churchyards. The BBC published imagery that showed the bodies had been lying in those streets for weeks, which meant the killings weren't isolated incidents in the chaos of combat. They were systematic, deliberate, a massacre. Russia, of course, tried to spin it. The Kremlin called it staged, claimed the dead were actors, that the photographs were fakes. But evidence piled up, investigations were conducted, and by August 2022, Ukraine had confirmed the final toll: 458 people killed in Bucha, 419 of them executed with weapons. Almost all were civilians. Some of the most chilling discoveries were mass graves. In one, 116 people were buried on the grounds of the Church of St. Andrew I called. The place where they had prayed in life became their unmarked burial site in death. Another 50 victims were simply left in the streets, decomposing under the open sky. The brutality was overwhelming. It wasn't just about killing. It was about dehumanization, a message of terror. Among the names tied to these atrocities was Azatbek Omurbekov, a Russian commander labeled the Butcher of Bucha. Sanctioned by the EU and the UK, Omurbekov was accused of leading his men in acts of murder, rape, and torture. Yet sanctions were the harshest punishment the international community could impose at the time. Assets frozen, travel banned. Symbolic gestures compared to the scale of his crimes. And as of September 8th, Omerbekov's fate remains unclear. Was he among those struck down in Khabarovsk? Her hasn't said. If he was, they'd likely keep that information under wraps for now. If he wasn't, then Ukraine's message still stands: nowhere is safe. That's the true significance of this strike. It wasn't just an attack. It was a statement. Khabarovsk is closer to China than to Moscow, yet Ukraine reached it. That distance was supposed to be a shield. Instead, it became proof that HUR can operate anywhere inside Russia. For Russian soldiers who committed atrocities in Ukraine, the message is clear: time doesn't erase guilt. Distance doesn't guarantee safety. Justice may be delayed, but it is relentless. This wasn't Ukraine's first deep operation, and it won't be its last. Earlier in June, HUR carried out Operation Spiderweb. Trucks filled with drones, smuggled into Russia and stored in warehouses, were unleashed against 4 Russian air bases in a coordinated attack. Other missions have targeted high-profile individuals. In December 2024, Lieutenant General Igor Kirillov was killed by a remote-controlled bomb hidden inside a scooter. A year earlier, Vabloga Vladlen Tatarsky was assassinated when a statue handed to him during a public event exploded in his hands. Ukraine never officially claims these attacks, but the pattern is impossible to ignore. Behind HUR's growing capabilities is a deeper story, one that stretches back to 2015. That year, Lieutenant General Valery Kondratyuk traveled to Washington, D.C. carrying a suitcase full of secret Russian documents. His goal was to convince American intelligence agencies to partner with Ukraine after Russia's annexation of Crimea. The gamble paid off. According to ABC News, this marked the beginning of a deep relationship between Ukraine's intelligence services and the CIA. Over the years, the CIA helped reshape HUR, turning it into a modern, capable force. One U.S. official even described Ukraine's transformation as going from zero to one of our most important partners. That doesn't mean the CIA directly orchestrated the strike in Khabarovsk, but HUR's training, resources, and methods bear the fingerprints of years of collaboration, and the possibility of U.S. involvement, even indirectly, will unsettle the Kremlin. Russia, for its part, will bury the truth. Disinformation is one of its sharpest weapons. Global Rights Compliance reported that Russia manages tens of thousands of fake social media pages and networks of pro-Kremlin bloggers to distort reality. Expect that machinery to spin up now, flooding the information space with denials, distractions, and lies. But Ukraine won't care. HUR doesn't need recognition. Its success lies in secrecy, in striking and disappearing, in erasing enemies who thought themselves untouchable. For Ukraine, Khabarovsk was a success, a statement, and likely just the beginning of a new phase of the war. Because if her can eliminate the butchers of Bucha, more than 4,000 miles inside Russia, then who is safe? Where can Russia hide its soldiers, its commanders, or even its war criminals? The truth is nowhere. And that reality, more than the explosions themselves, is what Vladimir Putin should fear most.